Soul Collective podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Emily. I'm so excited to be with you. And we were just talking about it. We get to put on lipstick.
So fun and a rare occasion these days.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you know, I'm just so excited. I love your book, by the way. It's such a page turner. It's like this spiritual growth development memoir kind of combined with, you know, your own personal journey and page turner. So what inspired you to write the book?
You know, I was forced to write it. It's one of those things where stories come into your world and you have to write them. And I had a number of stories, but it was actually a divorce that happened in 2009 that shifted everything. I lost everything. I lost my house. I lost the relationship I thought I had. I lost all of the equity. I lost all of the fantasy as well as the potential. So don't ever marry potential or fall in love with fantasy. So you just have to, spiritually speaking, it was really essential for me to be a part of. And it was also essential for me to be yanked out.
Yeah. You know, so your book is called American Psychic. So you were already doing this psychic work, but you really transitioned. Yes. Beautiful. Thank you for holding up the cover of that for those that are watching on YouTube. So, you know, 25 years in the acting industry, and then you made this transition. So what brought about this dramatic change in the work that you're doing in the world?
Well, it started in the 90s. There was a situation that really made my antennas that were sort of already, you know, we're always percolating when we're growing up. There were little glimmers of psychic awareness during my childhood, but it wasn't supported. And I think that you have to have an environment to support that, or at least people that won't shut it down. So when this actually really started, mid-90s, I was working a lot as an actress, lots of television shows. I had just been cast on Lois and Clark as an ongoing role with Terry Hatcher as her secretary. And all of a sudden, I had a situation where I was being stalked by someone. And that stalking incident really was a gift of fear. It blew my antennas out of my head. They never went back down. And in going to law enforcement to ask for help, I in turn ended up working for law enforcement. So it was one of the most shocking things that could have ever happened to me.
Do you feel like that instance of fear sort of activated gifts that allowed you to kind of like protect yourself or be heightened, you know,
Yes.
Aware?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Emily, there is a book by Gavin DeBecker called The Gift of Fear. And actually, I call one of my chapters in the book that, because that intuition is something that all of the caretakers in law enforcement, I mean, we're talking Quantico people, will talk to you about your own intuition. And that really got exacerbated. I had to pay attention to it. But the most remarkable thing about it is that I had always been guided by a voice or a consciousness that I had been listening to. But what showed up, Emily, is like this woman that said, you know, why don't you go to that house that he's talking about? I think you need to go up there and pay attention. And this was the con artist that was inevitably became a stalker. He had been giving me information and he was telling me certain things. So I listened to this voice, and he had been talking about living in a house that he wanted to buy. So I went up to the street, did what this voice told me to do, found out that no one was living there, and the people that had lived there were dead. And the daughter of the dead people is who I actually called. And she's the one that told me, no, nobody's living there, but there was a guy that squatted in the house. And he took a lot of my parents' belongings. And that's actually how I met him. He was trying to ingratiate himself to people by giving away some of their belongings.
Oh my goodness. What an unlikely chain of events.
I know, it's great. And also, I didn't believe in talking to the dead, Emily. Actually, I was so snarky about it. I had such an attitude, and always be careful what you're so judgmental about, because it might just happen to you. But that opened my eyes to, is this possible? Could this really be? And then I was watching television. I had been just, being stalked is not a pretty thing. And I felt shut down, and I was watching the television, and the short guy with the mustache and blue eyes came on, and it was James Van Prague. And he was reading people in the audience talking to their dead relatives. And I'm like, that's just a crock. How can that even be? And to make a long story short, of course, it's in the book, I ended up in his house 2 days later.
Wow.
And this was before he was even famous, before his first book started coming out. So this is who basically helped me understand that this is part of my abilities. And I fought it tooth and nail and ended up working with the US military psychic spies who actually helped me understand this work. They were the ones that made me feel less crazy.
Mm. Did you feel like in your experience, you really needed to cultivate those gifts? And was there a part of you that had a hard time trusting the guidance and information that was coming through?
You bet. I thought it was crazy. So I did everything I could, Emily. You know, we seek out help from the internet. Of course, at that time, the internet was not as prolific as it is now, of course. But we go to clergy, we go to therapists, we go to doctors. I mean, I went to the local agape church. I went to the Catholic church. I went to the First Christian church up the street from me here in Studio City. And I asked, and you know what? They all said, the Lord works in mysterious ways. Mm. And that was really sort of the understanding that I had even had as a child, that this might be possible. I just had to educate myself. Absolutely.
When you go back and you trace, back to your childhood, I know that, there were times that you talk about in your book being turbulent. Do you feel like, in some ways those gifts were shut down in your childhood, or were they heightened through your experience of pain?
Okay, well, that's an excellent question. And I've been working with a physicist for the last 10 years, Tom Campbell. And Tom and Bruce Lipton did this great video that's out there, and they're talking about the cellular structure, how the cells know and are taught by their environment. And I truly believe that the trauma that I suffered as a child is eventually what basically blossomed these abilities that I have. It's the heightened sensitivities that were the actual structure of me starting to see, hear, and feel much differently than, my childhood friends. As a young adult, I was heightened in my sensitivities. And, here's the other thing. What else was happening to me when things were being done that shouldn't have been? I was leaving my body. Now, in psychotherapy terms, that's splitting or disassociation. But that is actually what I do now as a psychic. I send my consciousness to other places to look around.
That's so fascinating that was actually a mechanism that you're now able to utilize, because I often feel like that disassociation can be sort of a blocking in a way, a blocking of the emotions or the guidance or, whatever's coming through, because we don't want to tune in and listen to that if it's too painful. But it sounds like, I guess my question for you is like, do you feel like you were destined to be doing this work and pretty much nothing could have stood in your way from doing it? Or do you feel like, it was more of an organic process?
Well, I think it's both. I really resisted it. But as I said, there had been glimmers of hope along the way regarding information. Like there's one story that I tell in the book where I'm 8 years old and I'm across the street at a neighbor's house breaking up bread for Thanksgiving stuffing. And I was waiting for my girlfriend to come home. And her mother was asking me to do that. So there I am in the kitchen looking at this bowl of bread, breaking it up. And all of a sudden, Emily, this was the first time it ever happened. My whole vision went blind to what I was seeing. I could no longer see the bowl or the bread or the mother in the kitchen. I was focused on a man and a woman in a parking lot. And the man was this mother's boyfriend. And he was talking to this nurse. And he was telling the nurse that he didn't want to be with Anne, the woman in the kitchen, that he wanted to be with the nurse. And he didn't want to buy Anne a Christmas present, that he wanted to buy the nurse a Christmas present. And I blurted it out. And Anne came over to me. She said, "How do you know that?" And what actually happened, they broke up, but they did marry. But that was at 8 years old.
Yeah. And, your book is you know, just chock full of these type of experiences of, you know, coming through with, you know, just multiple different examples of, you know, does it ever become sort of a hindrance where you're like, oh, that's a little bit TMI, or, you know, I want to turn off the guidance at some point?
Well, I think once you open the door and you agree to this, you start to make deals. You know, it's like I was just talking to a woman that years ago, she wanted to get a hold of me, and I just kept putting off the phone call and putting off the phone call. And at 4:51 in the morning, my phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was all static on the phone. And I was like, why in the world would she be calling me at 4:51 unless she really needed me? But no message, nothing, hung up. The cat was looking at me at the time like, what was that about? And I woke up at 7 and called her, and I said, Lisa, is there really any reason that you should have called me at 4:51? And she said, Marla, I didn't call you. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And she said, I didn't call you. And I said, go check your phone. So her phone was in her purse on the back of her chair in her office, and it had dialed me at 4:51. And I said, well, I guess I better talk to you. And she says, I think my dead mother's in my house. So her dead mother needed to talk to her. So I went out there and we worked together. So that it's setting up boundaries. It's like, and I know that so many of your listeners understand this because you talk about this in all of your work. You do want to help people get past their blocks. And sometimes the blocks are there as kind of an obstacle to go, wow, I can't go here, so maybe I have to go over here. Or I need to get over this. What do I have to do that? So the key to that, Emily, is being curious. If this block is in my way, like even with a writer's block, it took me 7 years to write that book. So it was
so inspiring to hear.
Yeah, 7 years. So because the way that I was trying to move it wasn't necessarily the way it was supposed to move. Now, I don't know if you've gotten to the end of it yet, but it really is one of the most dramatic things that could have ever happened in my life. But I thought that the book was going out 3 years before that even happened. So I had to wait for that incredible experience to happen.
Yeah. So
we just have to we have to be curious, you know, and not we can push, but if we go up against a wall, it's kind of like, well, okay, wall. I'll go around the side, or I'll stop for a moment. You know this. I know you know this. I know you know this. I know you know this too. Your timing about things is usually spot on. However, when you get discombobulated by trying to delegate responsibility and people aren't taking the responsibility that you're delegating, it will derail you.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is like what you were saying is that like pushing up and making it a little bit more of the effortless surrender, go with the flow, you know, instead of trying to effort your way through, you know, and like that is to me, like when you talk about writing your book, it's like this divine timing of letting it, you know, and if it, you know, you had waited or you pushed, it might not have, you know, blossomed into what it is.
Right. And I tried to go with a publisher that I thought wanted it. And I'm glad that didn't happen because of the way that things worked out. So trusting these things is really hard when we think that we're the ones that need to be in control all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anybody listening out there who really wants to develop, they have this sense of knowing like, you know, I'm getting these intuitive hits and I really want to deepen that, you know, what advice do you have?
Well, I think that one of the keys that I like to have is get your notebook going. And that notebook needs to be a place where you write down your downloads. I get a lot of downloads in the morning in the shower. It's just, I'm in preparation for my day. And because I do this work, and this is another key point to this, I do this work because it's for others. There's no other reason for me to surrender my life, leave a 25-year acting career in order to do just this work with people in groups, you know, work over the Zoom, be in a group for Zoom, you know, as this book came out, and the audiobook just came out a couple of weeks ago. There's no other reason unless it is to be in service. So when people are curious about this, they want to develop their own awareness. So that has to be able to help their family, their business, their friends in ways that will expand and culturally, humanitarianly, really consciously have it move. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So it sounds like you're saying really coming from the highest, greatest good, and really, yeah, not from a place of ego or wanting to try to control, but like really allowing divine love to come through, which is, you know, such a beautiful lesson and practice. How does guidance come through for you? You know, is it?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll give you exactly how it works. Do you remember what you did when you woke up this morning?
I looked at the sky.
Okay. And you got out of bed. I mean, you can look at what you were doing. You have a memory of what that looks like, right?
Yeah.
And how you went in and made yourself a cup of coffee, or you jumped in the shower right away, whatever it was. You can play that in your mind like it was a memory, correct?
Yep.
So what happens to me is that I go blank and memories start coming into my head that aren't mine. So if my intention is always to work for your highest good, if I'm working with you, or just anybody on anything, whether it's working with law enforcement, whether it's working with lawyers, whether it's working with entertainment executives, my intention is to see things for your highest good. Probability factors, that's the psychic part. Also, the dead person part is allowing us to build a bridge. We're building a bridge of love. That's what we're doing. So I allow myself to build that bridge with a deceased loved one, connecting to you. And all of a sudden, I will see things. I'll be in someone else's house. I'll be in someone's car. I'll be on the beach. I'll be in the middle of a field. There's a murder that I detail in the book about my first crime scene photo, holding that crime scene photo, and then all of a sudden I am in the field where the girl is murdered. I'm actually the girl, and I'm walking with a friend of mine, and I know what he's wearing, I know his name and everything, and he hits me, and it's shocking, and then I'm dead. So it is as though my consciousness teleports or bilocates to a place that a deceased person wants to show me. Or if I'm on a call and working with someone, and I'm in an executive's office, and I start to see down the hall a problem with an associate, that might be the thing that we need to talk about. He might want to talk about how to move his business forward, but I might see that there is an individual down the hallway who has been betraying him. That's the best way to describe it. So I have memories that are not mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see, hear, and feel. You know, you understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And so it's really this combination of different sensations. And so, you know, we were chatting a little bit earlier, which was like, how do you start to cultivate these gifts, you know, and you start to have these intuitive hits, and how do we start to even deepen that trust and that knowing?
Okay. One of the things that helped me move the pain that I had, because there was a lot of trauma. I did a lot. I mean, I sang, I danced, I was an actress. I was, you know, taking over other people's personalities on stage and having fun, but I was moving the energy. So if you have history where there's trauma, and if you're not working on it, you're going to have those stumbling blocks along the way. I really do think it's like having dishwashers and washing machines thrown in the midst of your own stream. It really is. These boulders that are there from historical woundings. So I'm all about making sure that people get healthy so that they can mentally understand, oh, this is a trauma piece for me I really need to work on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a great analogy, because I'm almost imagining a dishwasher or that background noise. It's hard to, discern between.
It really is. It's a trauma, and those traumas will trigger us to feel emotion about something that is not real in this moment. It might be real in the past. Because my mother was so abusive, if someone were to smack me on the upper part of my thigh, I might turn around and cold cock them, because that is a reaction inside my body. I'm an adult now. No one would ever do that to me and get away with it. So immediately I would have a response inside my body where I would elbow them or kick them. I mean, that's kind of how visceral those responses are.
Yeah.
So we have to learn how we think. We have to pay attention to how we think. In race relationship right now, I talk a little bit about my mother being from the South, and how it was just the way that people talked back then, but it had this insidious, eroding tone to it all my life. My sister and I both had very strong reaction to it. So we knew when we were born into this family that kind of treatment of anybody that was different, anybody that wasn't white, we had to look at that and go, that's not right. There's an incident in the book where I'm standing on the window well, where there's a woman that was helping my mother. And I knew, like this deeply sensitive child, that she should never be working there. She didn't want to be there. I could feel her anxiety. I knew that she had a life that she wanted to change, and she did change it, but she had to leave, working for my mother. Those kinds of things are so deep inside of us that we don't even know we have them.
Yes. Yeah. And I love how you really illustrate so poignantly in the book about how if we do have some type of past trauma or, something that we're dealing with in childhood, that there's always gifts and ways that will resurface so that we're able to really face that and heal it.
Yeah. So that you ask, how do we allow ourselves to be more psychic? That's the first part of the book, is called blind sight, which is a medical term that actually means a blind person who has the ability to perceive a light source. So if you're blind and you can see light coming in, that means you're blind sighted. So there's something inside your consciousness that's going to help you get out of this darkness. And it was actually a blind woman who taught me that years ago when I was growing up, that because she could feel me come into the room. She knew me like even my parents didn't know me. It was so wild. And then the second half of the book, when all the healing starts and all the insight starts, is called insight. So it's the blind sight, telling the stories of how these all happened, and then the wounds, and going, oh my God, I have to do something about this.
Yeah.
And you start the healing process. And one of the key things I learned, because I was in life coaching for years as well as therapy, but one of the things I learned, Emily, with a life coach out here in Los Angeles, was he said to me, or in a group, you have to pay attention to how much you lie a day. How many lies do you tell? So when you start being conscious of how you think, you get to pay attention to what comes out of your mouth. Oh, well, where did that come from? Oh, that's just an old thought. Well, that old thought very well may be that, washer in the middle of your stream.
Yes. Yeah. It is like the subtlest, whispers from our subconscious that when we really start to, become aware of, it is, it can make a profound difference.
And to not need to be right. Even as excuse me, even as a psychic, I can't, my ego can't like, oh, I've got to be right. It's not about that. It's about me helping you. And sometimes I'll see something and, you know, a client will say, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, well, just circle it. And then a year later, I'll be in the middle of Trader Joe's. They'll call me. Do you remember when you were telling me about that blonde guy with the dark glasses that was going to come into my life and his name is going to be Brett, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm marrying him, or, you know.
Right. Well, you know, I guess one of my questions for you is like, you know, you talk about in the book is going into these murder investigations and with detectives that are really skeptical about what you do and really having no prior knowledge about the case and just coming in and not having any attachment to, you know, your input or and guidance. Like, how does that work for you? What is that like?
Well, I think the key around that was it's good when you're doing it for a television show because everybody has to behave well. In real life, the detectives aren't necessarily, look, here's the deal. Detectives don't really want to call you in unless they really, really need you. And they don't want to admit that they need you. They want to be able to do things themselves, which is fine. That's what they're supposed to do. But if it's a cold case, why not call me in? You got nothing to lose, right? So these dynamics, when you get the opportunity, which I've had a couple, to put them in front of a camera and have the cameras rolling, I'm literally in it. I am just doing my job. Other people have their own issues, like the detectives will have their own issues, like, oh, how could she know about that? Blah, blah, blah. But we don't know anything because none of us know enough about the case. We're all there working and we're just exploring it. And that's really one of the fun things about that book. When I talk about that case, because that cop who was so skeptical of me had to actually help me. I was becoming the perpetrator, giving information about the case. And I'm like, I'd never actually experienced that before. I took my shoes off and I was starting to feel gruff and I needed to be shorter. And it was almost as though, you know, part of an old acting skill of taking on a character was allowing my body to do that. And I'm saying to the detective, Mike, I've never had this happen to me before. You just like work with me and interrogate me like I'm the perpetrator. And we got information out of that perpetrator. It was crazy.
Has that happened to you since where you take on the perpetrator?
I've taken on personalities, but not a deceased perpetrator. When you ask about problems with cases, I've had a couple of situations in tracking serial killers, which is a lot different than contacting a deceased person. Sometimes a deceased perpetrator wants to help you. Sometimes I have had murderers or perpetrators give me details about murders that were essential, interestingly enough.
Because it's like a karmic debt or they want to clear.
Yeah, or what I like to say is once you leave the body, that soul does no longer have all of the issues in the tissues. So once again, going back to trauma, if you're traumatic, if you had traumatic stuff, if you were abused, if you had war wounds, if you had all of this stuff that made you drink or take drugs or all of the things that we do to medicate, that's all in the body. But when the soul leaves, the soul has memory of it and can show me things, but it's not walking around with all of the problems that it had. So many of the pathologies and the sociopathies are in the tissues because of either trauma or some form of brain aberration. So that is no longer there. But I still had to work out, you know, am I going to trust this perpetrator to give me the right answer?
Right.
And, or, you know, the victims don't often want to tell the details of their murder because they know it will upset the family member. So oftentimes they don't have to remind themselves of that, or me. They will give details about it, but it's not as though the details will be so upsetting because they were actually yanked out of the body because they before they hit a car, or before somebody hurt them so deeply that they died. Their consciousness was ripped out of the body. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. Wow. So, I want to go back to something that you said, Marla, which is just really this, cultivation of gifts and the process of healing. And so in your journey, what were some of the most instrumental pieces of the healing process?
Well, actually, my teachers in school gave me something that I didn't have at home. So wherever God gives us or blesses us with divine angels, that could be a neighbor, that could be a friend, that could be a teacher. It's somebody that has character, that gives us awareness that we need. It's a true gift. It was also singing in choirs. I loved singing in choirs. I loved being a part of all the things that were around that Trinity Lutheran Church that I grew up in. And it was the soul expressing itself through the vibration of song, which is very healing for people, especially when you have a throat that has been denied expression. You have to heal this area between your heart and your head, because the throat is where you not only hear spirit, it's the fifth chakra of hearing other consciousness, but it is your expression. And a lot of people that have problems expressing themselves have thyroid problems, have neck problems, have little voices. So you have to work on that. The other thing is I had to choose to get assistance. And I went through many therapists, and I'm still friends and colleagues with the ones that were helpful to me. But I also explored various modalities of healing. Whatever your soul leads you to do, it might be for a week, a couple of years, but that's how your soul is guiding you to get help. Pay attention.
I want to go back to what you said about the throat chakra block, because I feel like a lot of people can relate to that. Either they've been suppressed in this lifetime or previous lifetime. So, something that you said that was interesting for me was about hearing with the throat chakra.
Yes.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, the fifth chakra is about communication. So that communication is both ways. It's not only our voice, it's also the vibration of other voices. What's in the Akashic records or the database are frequencies, and we learn to hear them in different ways. I can work with animals. I just can't hear cats. I can hear dogs and I can hear horses really well. But cats, it's a frequency that I don't hear as well for some reason.
That's so interesting.
It is. And some people on earth can't hear their husbands, or they can't hear their wives. People shut down. One of the things that also happens, Emily, is the notion that when people are in coma or in Alzheimer's or dementia, that they are locked. Well, their body is locked, but their consciousness might be flying around and knowing a lot of stuff. I've often talked to people who seem to be locked in the physical, but their consciousness has left and knows what's going on. So that's another thing of being able to communicate with consciousness, because consciousness isn't stuck here. I don't know, you probably talk to, people that have had near-death experiences. So when they're out of their body, they're seeing what the doctors are doing to them, or they're hearing what people are saying down the hall. They're not in the body. They're watching what's going on at the time. So that means consciousness is not necessarily locked in the body.
What would you say, why do you think it's hard for somebody that is psychic or highly intuitive to sometimes receive guidance for themselves?
Well, we're very busy people. We keep ourselves busy. We keep ourselves distracted from our pain. And if we learn to keep doing that, then anything that seems uncomfortable is going to sidetrack us. You know, one of the reasons that I'm alone, I haven't been married or together really with anyone for a long time, since basically the divorce. Part of that is, unless I can be with someone who doesn't have all this nonsense in their life, or you know, if they're doing bad dealings on the side, you know, I can't hang out with like a mob boss or anything like that. The bottom line is, I can feel the frequencies. I can feel the information. So it's hard for me to be around people in a personal way unless I trust them.
Yeah.
So people are always, they're bombarded with news. They're bombarded with television. I don't even have a regular television. I have Apple TV, so I get to pick and choose.
Yeah.
I will read news or I will listen to the BBC. I can turn on this wonderful computer screen and listen to news if I need it. But I have to be very, very careful about how I bombard myself. So when you say, why is it a problem? One of the things about this pandemic, Emily, is that it's making people be isolated. It's making people have to protect themselves and think of others. You know, we talked about the book and how I had been on this 2-year, you know, book tour across the country and in Europe. And I was actually paying on a trip to Italy. Last October, I had been paying on a trip to Italy for this September to take my book and be with Tom Campbell, this physicist, and all of these other Europeans to do some of the work that I do. And I stopped paying on the trip. I just was like, I don't know why I'm not paying on this trip, but I'm not going. And I want to go, but I'm not going. Not knowing that it was the pandemic, not knowing that. But here's the key aspect. Our bodies will tell us stuff. So here's how we get sickness involved in all of this. If you are not listening to your intuition and you start having pain in your body, there's a reason that you have that pain. If you end up going to the doctors and finding out that you have something really wrong with yourself, you're going to be like, wow, I thought about that years ago. Why didn't you pay attention to it?
Yep.
And that is an opportunity. All illness gives us the opportunity to go inward and heal.
Yeah.
So we want to keep listening, and you can question yourself, but write it down in that notebook. You know, like on August 20th, I was sitting and listening to Marla and Emily, and I was thinking about the fact that that pain inside my foot really needs to be looked at. Oh, it's nothing. Oh, it's just a, you know, it's a burr. Or what just happened to a client of mine, she basically thought it was a cyst, and the doctor told her it was, and it was no problem, but it was a sarcoma. But her intention knew something was wrong. So she kept going from doctor to doctor. And that's what we have to listen to. And, you know, we just literally have to pay attention. And it's not about we have to be right. It's more like, why am I thinking about this again? If you start to think about things on a day that you're not used to thinking about, the fact that you need to stop eating fish, you have to ask yourself, wow, I've been buying fish from Jack's down the street, and I've been buying fish and something's telling me not to eat the fish. And 2 weeks later, you find out that there was an outbreak of salmonella or paralytic shellfish poisoning at that store.
I love this advice that you're giving. Any other like signs or symbols that we should pay attention to?
Well, people always like to make shit up. Am I allowed to say that?
Yep.
You know, it's like, oh, I was playing with Glide and it made me think of my grandmother. Oh, she must be here, my grandmother is just doing her teeth all the time. Well, that's fine. It's fine. It's really about the love. Some bird flies by. Well, I'm sure that's my granddad. Well, that's fine too. Whatever makes you connect you know?
Yeah.
It's really about the love. But there are things that will get your attention, like lights flickering. And I was in a writing group before the book was published, and it was in another apartment after I gotten divorced, and I didn't know the electricity. We were in there, and there were 7 of us in there, and this woman was talking about her deceased boyfriend, and the lights started flickering, and we were like, well, could that be Dan? And we were laughing. And she said, oh, it probably isn't. Well, the lights started flickering again. We had this whole conversation with her dead boyfriend just through the lampshade.
Oh my goodness.
So truly, consciousness is what it's all about. Consciousness can show up in various ways. Sometimes people really need to get, a message like at 4:51 in the morning. I needed to talk to her. I was resistant. No, call her, right? So these things, it's all up to you. How are you going to listen? And oftentimes our spouses, our friends, our family, they need to be supportive. We can't consistently hear, I don't want to hear that anymore. No, it's who you are. It's part of who you are.
Were you met with any resistance in this glamorous Hollywood lifestyle?
Well, actually, I opened the book with a story of me being on the set of a Captain Crunch commercial where I went blind to my circumstances and ended up talking with the actor who was playing my husband. And I was bringing in his dead father to talk about the baby. So there we were, chewing up Captain Crunch and spitting it out in a bucket and going back into, actually the community's been quite wonderful. I see more of the community now probably than I did as an actress because I'm working with the people behind the scenes, trying to get projects and the trajectories of things and working those things out. But it's also about what's being put into the consciousness. I can't make people do things, but I can certainly tell them when something is not going to go and why it's not going to go.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying sort of strikes a chord in the sense of like things accelerating and maybe more of an acceptance around what you're doing. And I don't know if it's this timing, but I do feel like there's so much more acceptance around these types of gifts. And do you find that as well?
Well, I hope so, because the truth of it is, it used to be that it was a Bible conversation, like, oh, psychic. Well, I literally put that term on my book, psychic, so we could talk about it. Because psychic is all of the things that were about the Bible, the visions, the prophecy, the divination, all of those things. It is psychic functioning. It doesn't mean that, sorry, I do have a few crystal balls, but it doesn't mean that you are gazing into the ball. The balls have frequencies. That's why people love crystals. It's because they have frequencies that stimulate your awareness. That's what they do. Those silicon chips from that are in watches make things happen. It makes the synapse happen, right?
Mm. So would you recommend like oracle or tarot cards as a way of activating?
Well, I think that I remember when I was in 4th grade, I found those tarot cards in the country store, and I was playing with them, and the woman said to me something like, some people think those are the devil's cards. And I'm like, well, they're really pretty and the blah, blah, blah. She goes, I'll tell you what the devil is. It's alcohol. It's booze. That's the devil. So we had this whole conversation, and I thought, Jesus Christ Superstar, I will listen to Jesus Christ Superstar, the whole album, and I said, well, I'm also in the Trinity Lutheran Church. I wanted to feel like God wasn't going to get me. And then the cards were I began to understand that they were triggers for awarenesses, whether it is chicken bones, whether it's runes, whether it's the I Ching. What it's doing, Emily Harris, it is making us pay attention to consciousness. And this is the best PR for God. How in the world God gives us permission to access deceased loved ones. The whole thing about Christ rising, coming back from the dead, being risen, was to show us that life survives after death. The concept of born again is also, within the religious sect, but it truly is about reincarnation. It is being born again. Jesus didn't jump off the cross and show everybody his powers. No, he allowed himself to go through that process so that we might see the resurrection of spirit, that there is life everlasting.
Beautiful. What would you say is your, spiritual practice?
Oh, well, first off, I get really emotional. I just went through a couple of days of, there were some suicides and there was some cancer with clients. And I am just so humbled by life. And we're in very tricky times. And we have to find the strength inside of our souls to find out what is right within us. And it's not about being right. It's about what I've learned from the tenets of Christianity and from all of actually, if you look at all of the religions, when you boil it down to, it's basically the golden rule. It's the way of treating others and not being frightened of others, but understanding that we are here to evolve. And this goes back to our forefathers, Emily. You read about it in my book that my mother's family were slave owners and my father's family was even connected to Ulysses S. Grant. So slave owners, slave liberators, people that were trying to do the right thing, people that were thieves, all of this, duality that we have. And I believe that we've lived many times. And I believe that I came back at this time in that family to do exactly what I'm doing, just like you.
What would you say your mission is?
I think my mission is healing the fear, healing the trauma into transformation. So it's basically from the trauma and the drama into transformation.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And however we have to do that, and we all do at some point in time. Karma is strange. It's a strange bedfellow. It's always there nudging you. When you've done wrong, you know about it. Unless, of course, you have a group of people around you that keep supporting your bad behavior, then you can get away with it. You keep getting away with it, so you think you're okay. Who is going to hold your feet to the fire? Someone that loves you, someone that cares about you and says, you know what, Emily, that was a little rough what you did yesterday. And you go, that's right. You're right. And our moms inside of us, even though my mother was a challenging person, now that she's been in spirit, I think that, I may have had COVID in December and January. We really had something like this that early here in Los Angeles. And my mother came to me and gave me a memory that I never thought about, which is getting a humidifier with warm, moist air, which helped me deeply. So my relationship with my mom is completely different in spirit than
Do you talk to her on the regular?
I talk to her when it's necessary. Yeah. She's got her own process. Both my father and my mother. My father just showed up in a dream the other night. And just to remind me, we have these amazing lives and we have to pay attention.
Yes. What would you say, Marla, right now? We're all kind of navigating this very unique and challenging experience collectively. What do the thems say about?
You're telling your listeners about thems. Thems was an acronym that I came up with when I was going through the divorce. There were so many people asking me, well, what do your guides say? What does God say? What does Jesus say? What does the Holy Spirit say? And I'm like, thems? Oh, thems. They're here, they're fine, they're helping me. And then I heard, well, if you're going to use the terminology thems, you better know what it stands for. The Heavenly Eternal Messaging System.
Love it.
So what would them say about what's going on? Or what was that? I'm sorry, I just had a senior moment not remembering what your question was.
Yeah, exactly that. Like how to navigate this time.
Okay, well, we're all running around in fear. We have to stop that. When we're in fear, we medicate ourselves. And there's an awful lot of substances out there to medicate ourselves. We actually need to be as strong as we possibly can. That means eating well. That means a lot of rest. That means not inundating ourselves with frequencies that are negative. The other thing about that is there are sources that you can watch on TV, various programs that will make you so angry that old people feel alive. There are a couple of television programs, and one of them is a news source, where if old people watch it, they feel like they're alive because they have the fight going on. It's keeping those people alive because they identify with the hate. They identify with the anger. They want to be right. They want to, whatever. Right. That's keeping them alive.
Yeah.
But it's also stressing them out.
What do you do personally to raise your vibration?
Well, I have to be very careful about my diet. Sugar's not great for me. I wish I could have more booze, but I can't. I have to be very careful about coffee, and I hike. I was up at 5:30 this morning up on Fryman Canyon in Los Angeles, hiking with a little, what do you call it, a little flashlight until the sun came up. That's 6,000, 7,000 steps. That gets my heart going, gets me together. It makes me be in nature. I talk to the owls, and there was a coyote right in my path, and I'm like, don't wait for me. You're not waiting for me. Go on. It's okay. I talk with the bunny rabbits. I'm up there to commune in the best nature that I possibly can. So I do the hiking. I also am fortunate enough to swim a couple times a week. And I share a dog with friends of mine. I don't have a dog here in my space, but I do share the dog. And I think that our fur babies are important. So it's about loving your friends, even on the phone. Being able to get on the Zoom and talk with you and be connected through your heart about things that are important. And it's not so self-referential. It's not people that whine about not being able to go to Starbucks or, this hair, it's seen better days, but I'm fascinated by the silver, but that's not important. This is important.
Yes. Yeah. I love those tips.
Yeah. We've had this opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it is being really mindful of what raises and lowers our vibration, that especially because I'm getting this more and more, is that we are such sensitive beings, and just even, a short programming or tuning into the news, eating sugar, or, I'm getting this, and I don't even drink a lot of coffee, but it's like, you got to stop that coffee thing.
Yeah, it can be okay, but it will mitigate you. It will take you down, mitigate. It will diminish what you thought it was for in the first place. It will deplete your system. And it's all about the love. That's really what it's all about. And it's about really paying attention. If I can leave you with anything, it truly is the nature of paying attention to what you think. If you walk across the street because you've seen or watched somebody do something and you have an attitude about it, or you have a judgment, it's really important to go, wow, why am I so judgmental? I'm judgmental of the fact that they had something on their shirt, or I'm judgmental about how they looked, or their body size, or what they wore. Why are you thinking that? Who put those ideas in your mind? You know, I had, you know, the pathology. I'm so grateful for my mother. She was a piece of work, and she had hollow entitlements, and she had racist ideas, and she was really beautiful, and yet she could be so horrible, and she could be sweet, and she was just pathological, and no one could get a handle on her. So having to survive her and having to witness her, and what was most inauthentic, Emily, which was the heartbreaking thing that I had to forgive myself for, was agreeing with her to survive.
What do you mean by that?
Well, she was, when she was angry about somebody, if I didn't agree with her, I would be hurt somehow, emotionally, physically, whatever. So it's Stockholm Syndrome, if anybody's interested in it. It's not just, you know, you have to be with the Symbian Lebanese organization like Patty Hearst. No, you are abused emotionally, intellectually, sexually, spiritually by perpetrators or narcissists. And if you have that in your pattern, you have got to find your own strength.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. And I feel like everybody listening on some level can relate to that.
Yeah.
You know? And I think
you cannot have your voice be stopped. Oprah said it in the 2018 Golden Globes, that telling the truth was the greatest thing you could ever do for yourself.
it's so true. And that's why I love your mission and what you're doing in the world, because it really gives other people permission to be the full, authentic expression of themselves, you know, and whatever your gifts are, whether it's psychic or whether it's intuitive, you know, we all have gifts that we're meant to express in this lifetime.
Well, let's get you a show. You have a podcast now, so let's get you a show. Let's get you on a network. Let's find a place for you where you can do this in a bigger way when this whole thing is over.
I would love that.
Let's do it. Okay. All right. Poof. There it is.
Said the psychic, and so it is. Marla, this has been such an amazing conversation connecting with you. Let listeners know where they can go to connect with you and your work.
Certainly. Well, it's the book's website, which is americanpsychicbook.com. We'll give you all the information about the book. It's up on Audible now. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Simon & Schuster. It's on all of those sites. If people are interested in the editorial reviews, the ones on Simon & Schuster are the full editorial reviews. And the book has been out for 2 years, and I relaunched it because of the audio. The audio was a whole nother thing. And you can go through the americanpsychicbook.com and it will click you to another site, my marlafrees.com, where if you need to talk to me or you want to work with me, you can fill out the form, tell them that we met through you, Emily Harris, and we'll take a look at whatever people want to do. But I'm very interested in seeing what you're going to do.
Thank you, Marla.
You're welcome. My pleasure. I want to be a part of that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm so grateful for this opportunity to connect with you today. And, you know, we're going to be raffling off a copy of your book. It is such a page turner. So tag Marla and I on Instagram. Let us know what your biggest takeaways were from this conversation. And I know this won't be the last time we connect. So thank you.
You're welcome. And please follow me on Instagram. You and I have connected in that way. And I think that it's a really wonderful, it's an important part of the connection with visuals. And you're so lovely. And I know that you have a lot to do in this world. And I'm excited about what that's going to be. And I want to help you do that too.
Awesome. Thank you so much.